Okay, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the second day of our exciting interrogation of histories of a future environmental catastrophe. And I would like to open the morning session by inviting Professor Gülhan Balsoy, who came from Istanbul to speak with us. Gulhan is an associate professor of history at Istanbul Bilgi University, at the history department. She received her PhD at Binghamton University, New York. She spent a year in Berlin as a postdoctoral researcher at the UMI project, Europe in the Middle East in Europe. She's also the author of The Politics of Reproduction in Ottoman Society, 1838-1900, out with Routledge, 2013. A Turkish translation of this book, Kahraman Doktor İhtiyar Acuziye Karşı, has won the 2016 Yunus Nadi Social Sciences and Research Award. Some of her significant publications include Haseki Women's Hospital and the Female Destitute of 19th Century Istanbul, and Infanticide in 19th Century Ottoman Society, published in Middle Eastern Studies, and Gendering Ottoman Labor History, the Jibali Regie Factory in the early 20th century, published in International Review of Social History. Dr. Balsoy's research interests include late Ottoman social history, history of women and gender, and history of medicine. Currently, she is working on a research project that is relevant to us all on the social history of death in late Ottoman Empire. So, Gulhan, please.
Thank you very much, Avner and On, for inviting me. It's really, I'm very happy to be here and part of this workshop that helped me to learn a lot as well. I was worried that my title is a little bit too specific, but it's also a learning process. I understood it here, so I will try to see whether I can speculate enough or not. Anyway, I'm not sure about here, but Handmaid's Tale, a web and TV drama based on Margaret Atwood's dystopian novel, has been one of the most popular shows in many different countries in the past few years, including Turkey. In the last year, everybody was watching Handmaid's Tale and talking about that. And that story takes us to a world where fertility rates have collapsed as a result of environmental pollution, sexually transmitted diseases, and immorality. And after a civil war, a theocratic government, Gilead, has established rule. The world of Gilead is a totalitarian one with strict social, class, and gender hierarchies. Surveillance is the core of the political rule, and women are inferior and subordinate to men. Since the fertility rates have sharply declined, the low number of women who still are able to conceive and give birth are reduced to a sex slave-like status. They were forced to serve as handmaids to men having high power positions. If they conceived, their babies are taken from them and then given to the legal wife of the father. If not, they were sent to forced work to clean nuclear waste, where they wouldn't be able to survive for long. Margaret Atwood had written this novel in 1985 in a context of rising political power of Christian fundamentalists, environmental concerns, and attacks on women's reproductive rights, mainly in the US. Since then, the concerns that gave way to this speculative novel have not diminished, but on the contrary, became more acute. And I believe it's partly the same concerns that brought us together here today. Margaret Atwood defines her novel as a speculative novel, so that's why I thought that it would be appropriate for me to start with that novel. In an interview, Atwood said that some of the ideas in the novel come from real examples of pronatalism. One example is the policies to increase female birth rates in Ceausescu's Romania, which were based on the policing of pregnant women and the banning of abortion and birth control. The idea of giving the offspring to lower classes to the ruling class came from Argentina, Atwood says. After the military junta seized power in 1976, up to 500 children whose parents have disappeared were placed with selected leaders' houses. Moreover, the year when Atwood was writing the novel, US pronatalists were bombing and setting fire to abortion clinics. US Medicaid had ceased to fund legal abortions, and several states passed laws restricting legal abortion, as well as providing abortion information. In Canada, where Atwood is from, the country's most outspoken abortion advocate at the time, Dr. Henry Morgentaler, had been charged yet another time with performing abortions outside the restriction of the Criminal Code of Canada. Atwood says that it was this climate that made her imagine a world where maternity is so tightly linked with state oppression. In Atwood's ultra-patriarchal Gilead, handmaids are reduced to their uteruses and forced to offer their bodies as vessels for conception and childbearing. Yet Gilead is not alone or unthinkable of in terms of the control of women's sexuality, body, and reproductive functions. We know many examples of the ways ancient and contemporary powers try to control maternity. But yet we also know that the modern state, as a relatively recent political structure, had developed more diffuse and complicated mechanisms to control sexuality and reproduction. And in the next part of my presentation, I will try to take us from Atwood's dystopic world to the 19th century Ottoman world and then to the pronatalist policies of the modern Turkey, two contexts where concerns over population were expressed through a vocabulary of control over motherhood and child rearing. In the Ottoman case that I work on, the state control on women's reproduction dates back to mid-19th century, to 1838, to be more specific. In the multi-ethnic, multi-religious, and multicultural Ottoman world, reproductive decisions were shaped predominantly by one's faith or denomination up until mid-19th century. In 1838, however, the first state document banning abortion as a worldly issue was promulgated. This date is kind of familiar to those who know the field. It was just 1 year before the promulgation of the famous 1839 Tanzimat script, which announced a change in tax collection methods, legal system, and which is considered a signpost of the transformation of the state-society relationship. With the transformations it announced, the Tanzimat script has been considered the symbol of the formation of the modern Ottoman state. And I think the overlap of the changes in the nature of the state and the initiation of state pronatalism is not a mere coincidence. On the contrary, modern state power reveals itself also through its intervention to the most intimate spheres or intimate lives of peoples. I argued in my previous work that Ottoman pronatalism was formulated through three registers: professionalization of midwifery, bans on abortion, and the medicalization of pregnancy and childbirth. The first step to decrease maternal mortality rates and increase childbirth rates was the transformation of medical services at birth in the Ottoman case. For this purpose, a midwifery school was established in 1842. Although the education in the school failed in a short time, the Ottoman state increasingly sought to license midwives and regulate their activities. And being licensed became the main marker of difference and main source of opposition as hierarchy and opposition among the midwives. Being licensed, there was for example, as opposed to the Western or Anglo-Saxon cases, the main opposition was not between the doctors and midwives, but between licensed and unlicensed midwives. The policies to ban abortion was another major venue of Ottoman pronatalism. While Ottoman authorities were trying to implement policies to improve health standards at childbirth, they also sought ways to decrease abortions, which they believed was one of the main sources of the shrinking population. An anti-abortion campaign, which stretched over a few decades, was carried out on discursive, legal, and everyday policy levels. And the examination of the anti-abortion campaign reveals that population policies of the 19th century were framed by gender and led to the politicization of female sexuality. Pronatalist policies sometimes held women responsible for the low rate of population growth, sometimes asked them to bear and tend children for the well-being of the country, but always invoked assumptions about femininity and what the ideal woman was like. And giving birth was seen as a humanitarian and national duty, while abortion was associated with murder. Healthcare during pregnancy also received the attention of the medical doctors. They maintained that a healthy pregnancy was the precondition of having safe childbirth and raising healthy children. In order to draw wider attention to the importance of proper health care during gestation, the doctors expressed their ideas by publishing advice books targeting pregnant women. The prescriptive literature on pregnancy conceptualized this important female experience as a medical event that should be checked and controlled by the experts. The normative sources redefined the female body as a maternal body, and they advocated disciplining this body in the light of the prescriptions defined by medical doctors. Along with the medicalization of pregnancy, the situation of those women who failed to conceive or experience pregnancy was also problematized. Ottoman intellectuals and medical doctors saw infertility as the final factor hindering their goal to promote population increase and sought ways to cure it. Although we don't have adequate documents or registers to predict the population increase rates for the 19th century, Cem Behar and Ellen Duben's classic work on Ottoman family structure suggests that birth rates slightly increased throughout this period. We also know that factors such as better sanitation, enhanced public health services, widespread vaccination positively affected the population increase rate throughout the 19th century and early 20th century. Yet, despite these factors promoting the welfare of the extant population and pulling the average life expectancy a few years up, Ottoman state had undergone significant population loss during that time, mainly due to wars, territorial losses, and migration movements. The population, which was estimated to be somewhere between 25 and 32 million in 1830s, was around only 19 million in 1923 when the Turkish Republic was founded. The new republic had a strong aspiration to restore the population figures by promoting increasing population growth rates and decreasing the maternal and infant death rates. And although the Turkish Republic claimed a radical break from Ottoman methods of governing the citizens, management of reproduction, I argue, was one of the few fields where we can observe a strong continuity. For example, the pronatalist policies continued and strictly forbade abortion, disseminating of knowledge on birth control methods, and providing birth control. It was the same doctors and same experts who also designed the new Republican pronatalist policies. Only in the post-World War II context, Turkey underwent increase of its population and maternity rates for the first time for more than 100 years started to increase, and that is similar to what happened in many parts of the world, actually. It was part of a global trend. And this period, for the Ottoman case, was a period of socialization of health services and brought major gains to ever-growing portions of the population in terms of easier and cheaper access to medical facilities, welfare, and social security. While urbanization, education, and entry to paid work curtailed fertility and childbirth rates, the positive changes in medical standards decreased significantly the maternal and child death rates. The number of maternity clinics per woman, as well as the number of beds and number of experts in those clinics started to increase, which promoted higher population increase rates. And the ever first 5 years development plan, announced in 1965, was the first that foresaw that population increase in Turkey was too high, and it aspired to provide family planning services throughout the country. And in 1983, Turkey changed its pronatalist policies with clearly antinatalist ones, with the fear that large population would lead the country to poverty and underdevelopment, and seeing population this time as a problem. This policy is kind of changing as well, but I won't continue that much with that. But to summarize what I had presented until this point, from mid-19th century to 1980s, the main problem, first for the Ottoman Empire and then for the Turkish Republic, was the low population density and low population increase rates. And only after 1960s, the population increase rates started to increase, and it was the post-1980 context when Turkey saw high magnitude of population as a problem. So much for the Ottoman and Turkish policies of reproduction. But before coming to the population question on a broader level, I want to say that, like, what happened in 19th century and 20th century was very much part of a global trend, and the Ottoman and Turkish case were no exception, and like pronatalist policies were very strong almost everywhere. But as opposed to the past 2 centuries, 19th and 20th century, where the economic and military power of the states were measured with the magnitude of their populations, we also globally have already stepped into a new period where large population is seen as a social and economic and also ecological problem. If I briefly remind you the population figures of our world, there were only 1 million people on Earth like 10,000 years ago. By 1800, there were 1 billion, and by 1960, there were 3 billion people, and there are almost 8 billion people today, globally. And when these figures are plotted on a graph, the growth line looks like almost vertical from 1800s onward, like some of the other charts we saw yesterday, like the consumption of coal or other resources. And UN projected that the global population would reach 12 billion by 2100. These large population figures are in many ways linked to the environmental crisis. Higher population means higher consumption of worse resources, more pollution, consumption of more meat, more diseases, more global warming. A Google search with the words climate change and population growth produces, my recent search produced 171 million results, which I wasn't able to check, obviously. And there are very different camps worried about the large global population and its hazardous environmental consequences. Some radical sides, which we might call neo-Malthusians, argue that we should altogether stop reproducing. Another name for this movement is called Advocacy for Volunteer Human Extinction. And those volunteers argue that overpopulation would lead to food shortages, famine, and they call for a zero population growth. According to this view, we are already overpopulated, almost at 4 billion, so even stopping at 2 children doesn't make any sense to save our world, and we should altogether stop reproduce. Other milder sides agree that a sustainable population size will be easier to maintain if societies assure women the autonomy and contraceptive means they need to avoid unwanted pregnancies. Many population experts believe that if we improve the health of women and children in especially developing nations, reduce poverty and infant mortality, increase women's and girls' access to basic human rights such as health care, education, economic opportunity, and educate women about birth control options and ensure access to voluntary family planning services, women will choose to limit family size, and the solution will come in an easier and smoother way. Although in principle I agree with these ideas, but there is still something that makes me slightly uncomfortable with the views alerting us toward high population increase rates and their hazardous conclusions. So, Carolyn Merchant, who is one of the first ecofeminist historians, warns us that one problematic aspect of climate change discourse is homogenization of humanity into one undifferentiated group. However, according to her, the vulnerabilities, as like many other things, are distributed unequally too, and she warns us that the vulnerabilities to climate change cut across lines of gender, race, and class. Following Carolyn Merchant's warnings, I want to speculate from this point on and try to find my way. So, in history, diverse yet all male actors have legitimized their interventions to female reproductive choices as a necessity of development and progress or common well-being. The male elites and power holders argued that, for example, if the Ottoman Empire or the Turkish Republic want to be a world power, it had to control and manage population in the first place. The reproductive policies designed by exclusively male actors reflected a certain understanding of politics and power. Masculine understanding of power and progress meant that everything, first and foremost the nature itself, could and should be controlled. Female nature and one of the most natural female biological function, reproduction and childbearing, would also be controlled for the sake of the nation. Professional elites, especially doctors, apparently had no doubt that they knew much better than women themselves. They saw it as their right and duty to tell women about the right age of giving birth, right number of children, and the right way to raise those children. Midwives, who were the main specialists providing women health care during pregnancy and childbirth for centuries, were gradually replaced by the male obstetricians. Female practices of medicine were degraded, and local midwives were increasingly presented as harmful for women's and infants' well-being. In time, female knowledge was almost completely hijacked, and moreover, female voices were totally shut out of history. So, before ending my presentation, I want to ask, what if women had more agency on their own sexuality and bodies? What if it was women who designed reproductive policies? And here, rather than masculine politics obsessed with the control of nature and reproduction, could female agency create a ground for more egalitarian reproductive choices and reproductive rights? If female actors could have gained more space or more visibility, would it be ever possible to establish a more diverse and egalitarian democratic structure? Would democratic reproductive choices result in sharing the resources in more sustainable ways? Here, I want to underline that when calling for female politics, I am not simply suggesting replacing the male agents with just female ones or replacing men with women, but rather I want to ask if we could find and reinstate from history what has been silenced and suppressed as feminine. The historical structures not only subordinated women, but also made this subordination invisible. Both the historical distribution of power between genders and the way knowledge about this inequality is produced adds to the vulnerability of women today. Hence, creating possibilities to empower women is also linked with finding novel ways of writing history. Thank you.